Let's be honest for a second. If you've been feeling drained, numb, or like you're running on fumes no matter how much you rest, it's not because you're weak. In fact, the idea that burnout is a personal failure is one of the biggest lies people are told. And it's a lie that hits even harder for healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, techs, and anyone living inside the daily storm of hospital stress, chronic stress, and emotional exhaustion. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what's really going on with your constant burnout. And it's probably not what you think. Because here's the counterintuitive truth. Your burnout symptoms may actually be signs of strength, not collapse. You're carrying compassion fatigue, spiritual exhaustion, workplace overwhelm, and the weight of everyone's emergencies. But you've kept going anyway. That takes resilience. Most people will never understand. But the cost is emotional numbness, losing your purpose, and confusing burnout versus depression. And the longer you push through without the right kind of burnout recovery, the deeper the hole gets. So in this video, you'll discover why your healthcare burnout, or whatever form of overwhelm you're facing, isn't a personal flaw but a system-level trap you were never taught how to escape. You'll learn stress relief techniques that actually work, how to reduce burnout without quitting your job, and how to begin burnout healing, even if you feel like you have nothing left. And if faith plays a role in your life, you'll even see how reconnecting spiritually can rebuild your inner strength. By the end, you'll understand why you're exhausted and how to finally break the cycle. The hidden roots of burnout, why it's not weakness. Most people think burnout happens because someone can't handle stress, but a mentor who's watched thousands struggle knows that's far from the truth. Burnout usually shows up in people who care too much, who push too hard, and who carry responsibilities no one else wants. That's why healthcare burnout, nurse burnout, and doctor burnout hit the most dedicated workers first. When someone keeps showing up despite chronic stress and emotional exhaustion, it's not weakness, it's misplaced strength. And somewhere inside this truth sits the real reason burnout recovery becomes so complicated. He often explains it like this. Burnout isn't a fire that starts inside you, it's a fire that starts around you. Think of a nurse juggling hospital stress, compassion fatigue, endless alarms, and the emotional numbness that comes from seeing too much suffering. That person isn't overwhelmed because they're fragile. They're overwhelmed because the environment demands more humanity than one human can give. And that same cycle happens outside healthcare too. Anyone overwhelmed at work can feel trapped between purpose and pressure. That contradiction is the real spark behind burnout causes. Yet here's the part that most people never stop to examine. Burnout symptoms are actually signals pointing to deeper misalignment, values clashing with workload, purpose clashing with pace, and spiritual exhaustion subtly draining a person's resilience. When someone feels stuck, they often blame themselves instead of recognizing the system around them. But once they understand the true signs of burnout and finally see the pattern clearly, something inside them shifts, and that shift opens the door to a much bigger realization that will matter even more in the next step. The emotional cost no one talks about, and why you keep ignoring it. He has seen countless people, especially healthcare workers, push through emotional exhaustion long after their internal alarms started ringing. Many convince themselves they just need a day off, a good night's sleep, or a long weekend. But burnout solutions don't work when the problem isn't rest, it's emotional overload. Imagine a doctor who hasn't eaten in 8 hours, a nurse juggling 3 high-acuity patients, or a tech trying to comfort a family while managing hospital stress. They don't break because they're weak. They break because they're human, and no one has taught them to recognize burnout symptoms early enough. The emotional cost becomes even higher when people ignore compassion fatigue. Think of the moments when someone says, "I'm fine," even though they feel spiritually drained or disconnected from their purpose. Healthcare fatigue is sneaky. One day you care deeply, and the next day you're numb. Not because you don't care, but because you've cared too much for too long. A mentor would remind them to pause and check in with themselves. One simple technique is the 2-minute audit, asking, "What am I feeling right now? What am I avoiding? What do I need?" It sounds small, but it breaks the cycle of emotional numbness. And here's the part most people never hear. Ignoring your emotional weight doesn't make you stronger. It makes the crash harder. When someone avoids the emotional truth behind their workplace overwhelm, they end up confusing burnout versus depression, which delays healing even more. But when they begin coping with burnout by acknowledging what's really happening, they regain clarity. And clarity opens doors that lead to a deeper understanding of what feeds burnout in the first place, a discovery we move into next. The system you're trapped in and why it keeps draining you. He often tells people that burnout isn't just an internal experience, it's a systemic one. Many healthcare workers feel crushed not by the work itself, but by the system surrounding it. Understaffed shifts, impossible expectations, and the constant pressure to stay composed while the world falls apart around them. Nurse burnout and doctor burnout rarely come from a lack of passion, they come from a lack of support. Even outside healthcare, anyone overwhelmed at work knows the feeling of being squeezed by demands that never seem to end. That's why burnout recovery requires understanding the cage before you can escape it. Imagine a nurse who arrives early, leaves late, skips meals, and still feels guilty for not doing enough, or a physician juggling back-to-back patients while drowning in documentation. These are not signs of inadequacy, they're signs of a broken system that rewards self-sacrifice and punishes self-care. A mentor would urge them to take micro-actions, setting boundaries by blocking out 10-minute breathing breaks, using stress management apps, or practicing quick stress relief techniques like progressive muscle relaxation during shift changes. Small steps, but powerful ones, especially in high-pressure environments. And the system doesn't only demand your time, it demands your soul. That's where spiritual exhaustion enters the picture. Over time, people forget why they started, losing that original spark of purpose that once carried them through the hardest days. Recognizing this disconnect is the first step toward finding purpose again. But once someone realizes how their environment shapes their burnout causes, they begin to see a new possibility, that they can rebuild resilience from the inside out, even while the system stays the same, and that leads directly to the next insight. Reclaiming your inner strength, even when you feel completely drained. He often tells people that the most surprising part of burnout healing is this: the strength you think you've lost isn't gone. It's buried. Emotional exhaustion and workplace overwhelm don't erase resilience, they just cover it. Many healthcare workers don't realize that the same grit that carried them through chaotic shifts can also guide them out of burnout. A mentor would remind them that resilience isn't about pushing through. It's about learning how to rise without destroying yourself in the process. And that shift begins with one simple choice: to reclaim your energy intentionally. One of the most effective ways to rebuild inner strength is through micro-rituals that restore mental health for healthcare workers or anyone under chronic stress. For example, starting the day with 2 minutes of deep breathing while repeating a grounding phrase like, "I can only carry what's mine." Or using the small wins method, where they set one tiny objective per shift. Drink 1 full bottle of water, step outside for fresh air twice, or write down one thing they did well. These acts might seem minor, but they interrupt the cycle of compassion fatigue and emotional numbness. They remind the mind that progress is still possible. And for those whose faith matters, reconnecting spiritually is one of the most overlooked burnout solutions. It doesn't have to be elaborate. 5 minutes of prayer before a shift, listening to a worship song on the drive home, or reading a page from a book like Jesus Calling can re-anchor a weary soul. Whether someone draws strength from faith, purpose, or simple reflection, these small practices help them rediscover who they are beneath the exhaustion. And once a person begins feeling that internal shift, they naturally start asking the next big question, the one that leads to transformation in the final topic. Building a life where burnout can't thrive anymore. He often explains that true burnout recovery isn't about fixing a moment, it's about reshaping a lifestyle. Many people, especially in healthcare, return to the same routines that caused their emotional exhaustion in the first place. But a wise mentor would say the goal isn't to survive work. It's to build a life that supports you even when stress hits hard. That means creating systems that protect your mental health for healthcare workers and anyone dealing with chronic stress, so burnout no longer has the perfect conditions to grow. And surprisingly, the shift begins long before the next crisis. One powerful step is designing a personal resilience blueprint. For example, scheduling weekly non-negotiables like a 30-minute walk, 1 hour of uninterrupted rest on days off, or reading a book that fuels purpose, like Man's Search for Meaning. Another strategy is using the 3P check-in, asking yourself, is my pace sustainable? Is my purpose alive? Are my priorities aligned? These questions help prevent workplace overwhelm and keep someone grounded before the signs of burnout even begin. When people make these small adjustments consistently, healthcare stress relief becomes a lifestyle instead of an emergency fix. What he's seen time and time again is that once someone builds resilience intentionally, everything changes. Emotional numbness fades. Compassion fatigue lightens. The divide between burnout versus depression becomes clearer, and a person finally starts finding purpose again, sometimes in the same job, sometimes in a new path, but always with more clarity. These changes don't happen overnight, but they stack up quietly until one day, the person wakes up and realizes burnout no longer owns them, and that realization sets the stage perfectly for the message waiting in the conclusion. Now that you've walked through these insights, the real question becomes, what are you going to do with them? Burnout doesn't fade on its own. You have to interrupt it, and you've just learned tools, strategies, and mind shifts that most people never hear in their entire careers. So ask yourself, which part hit you the hardest? Was it recognizing your emotional exhaustion? Or realizing the system around you has shaped your burnout more than your own strength ever did? What small shift can you make today, literally today, to start rebuilding your resilience? Will you pause for 2 minutes to breathe? Will you reconnect with your sense of purpose? Will you finally stop pretending you're fine when the signs of burnout are clearly asking you to slow down? And maybe the biggest question, if you already know what's draining you, what's stopping you from changing it? If this video opened your eyes or helped you feel seen, don't walk away without staying connected. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because there's so much more to learn, more tools, more clarity, more ways to protect your mental health and reclaim your energy. Your healing matters, and you don't have to walk through burnout alone.